So what does the U.S.-Iran war look like at this point? How much has each side achieved? Let us walk you through the current state of this conflict in one video. As of March 15th, the conflict between the U.S.-Israel coalition and Iran has lasted 16 days. Both sides have suffered serious losses to their strategic assets under high-intensity fighting. As operations continue on all fronts, the U.S.-Israel coalition and Iran have shown very different approaches to warfare. Let's start by reviewing the achievements of the U.S.-Israel coalition. In this conflict, Iran's conventional military forces, especially its Navy and Air Force, have been devastated. Nearly all high-value naval assets have been wiped out. The naval base at Bushehr and the port of Chabahar have both been extensively damaged. All 9 of Iran's frigates were attacked, either sunk, destroyed, or rendered completely unusable. The IRGC-affiliated drone carrier vessels Bagheri and Makran were sunk. One of Iran's most advanced surface warships, the Soleimani-3 missile boat, was severely damaged and lost its combat capability. U.S. forces also conducted limited strikes on Iran's missile boats and mine-laying vessels, destroying over a dozen smaller craft of various types. Currently, Iran's Navy is down to roughly 1,000 small boats between 10 and 100 tons, retaining only scattered combat capability. Beyond the Navy, Iran's Air Force is in an equally dire situation. Air bases across the country were struck by U.S. forces. Iran has essentially lost all usable tactical aircraft, including its aging fleet of F-14s, F-4s, and F-5s. Although Iran was still capable of flying Yak-130 trainers and Su-24 fighter bombers after the 5th day of fighting, these scattered forces pose no real threat to the coalition. During the conflict, a Yak-130 was reportedly shot down by an F-35, potentially marking the F-35's first confirmed manned air-to-air kill. In addition to manned aircraft, several large Iranian drones were hit on runways and have not been seen in operation for days. We remain doubtful whether Iran still has any operational large UAV capability. Beyond military assets, Iran's infrastructure, government institutions, and administrative facilities have also suffered large-scale destruction from the U.S.-Israel coalition. This is especially evident in major cities such as Tabriz, Isfahan, Shiraz, and Kurdish regions. In Tehran, repeated airstrikes targeted the broadcasting center, revolutionary courts, police stations, Basij militia offices, IRGC outposts, warehouses, intelligence departments, and command centers, forcing large numbers of government personnel to set up temporary tents on the streets to continue working. Iran's counterattack capabilities, especially its missile production, have also been specifically targeted by the coalition. Iran's only large solid-fuel missile production complex located near Tehran has suffered severe damage. Although Iran claims it relocated equipment and personnel in advance, the production facilities themselves were still heavily destroyed. Iran's chemical industry has also been badly hit. The Parchin chemical complex, which dominates most of Iran's domestic acid production, was heavily bombed by coalition forces, severely crippling its ability to produce precursor materials for solid rocket fuel. Coalition strikes on missile bases in Tabriz, Isfahan, and other cities focused mainly on destroying vehicle access points. While this can delay the IRGC's missile launch operations, it does not destroy the underground facilities themselves. For example, certain missile launch bases have continued firing even after repeated coalition strikes, proving they have not been fully neutralized. However, IRGC missile storage depots in the Tabriz area have been successfully struck, showing the coalition can still degrade parts of Iran's missile stockpile. In operations hunting mobile missile launchers, the coalition confirmed destroying approximately 30 Iranian medium-range missile launch vehicles, though nearly half turned out to be empty trucks or decoys. About 50 short-range and air defense missile launchers were also destroyed. In one strike alone, over 10 Iranian launch vehicles and their support equipment at a logistics hub were wiped out simultaneously. The most damaging strike on Iranian civilian life occurred on March 8th when the Israeli Air Force bombed a fuel storage facility in Tehran, sending massive columns of smoke over the city. The following day, pollutant-laden rain fell over central Tehran, causing widespread breathing difficulties among residents and contaminating food and drinking water. The coalition also carried out varying degrees of destruction against fuel depots, power plants, and electrical substations in Isfahan, Shiraz, Tabriz, and other cities. This caused frequent and widespread power outages across Iran after March 8th.
On March 10th, U.S. forces launched a large-scale bombing campaign against Bandar Abbas, Iran's key trade port, temporarily rendering it inoperable.
Now that we've covered the coalition's results, let's look at what Iran's counterattacks have achieved.
Iran's most significant achievement was the destruction of a high-value U.S. radar, the FPS-132 early warning radar at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, valued at $1.1 billion. After being struck twice by Iran on February 28th and March 4th, satellite imagery indicates the radar's Iran-facing side has been destroyed, leaving the system largely inoperable.
On March 6th, Iran struck all THAAD anti-missile radar positions deployed by the U.S. military across the Gulf. The TPY-2 radar at Wafq Salti Air Base in Jordan was completely destroyed. 2 THAAD sites in the UAE also suffered extensive damage, though whether their radars were destroyed remains unclear. Beyond targeting radars, Iran also launched large-scale selective strikes against U.S. military bases across Gulf countries. Bases closest to Iran suffered the most, including the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain and all U.S. bases in Kuwait, Qatar, Dubai, and Abu Dhabi. More distant bases saw lighter damage, including Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia and U.S. bases in Jordan. These strikes primarily targeted satellite communication antennas, fuel depots, ammunition depots, and command buildings, leaving hangars, warehouses, and barracks relatively untouched, demonstrating deliberate and focused targeting. Iran also carried out limited but effective harassment of high-value civilian targets in Gulf states, repeatedly sending suicide drones against UAE international airports, forcing delayed openings and striking oil fields in Bahrain, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar, degrading their energy production capabilities. Iran has also effectively imposed a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz, striking over 20 tankers attempting to pass through. In coordination with Iraq's Popular Mobilization Forces, Iran has also conducted sustained harassment of U.S. bases in Iraq's Kurdistan region and Baghdad's Green Zone. Iran's strikes on Israeli territory have mostly targeted relatively random civilian areas with fewer military targets. Approximately 30 to 40 missiles successfully penetrated Israel's multi-layered defense system, landing near major cities including Jerusalem, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. Around 10 to 15 of those missiles were equipped with cluster warheads. Iran's biggest success against Israeli civilian targets was the strike on the Haifa refinery on March 12th. On the military side, Iran, in coordination with Hezbollah, successfully struck Israel's largest satellite communications base. As for other targets, Iran claims to have hit Israel's strict wartime information controls, make it difficult to assess actual damage and casualties to high-value Israeli targets. Regarding the 3 F-15Es accidentally shot down by allied Kuwaiti FA-18Cs and the KC-135 tanker possibly downed by Iraqi militia forces, since neither of these are Iran's achievements, we will set them aside for now. Having reviewed both sides' main achievements since the war began, let's briefly summarize their combat approaches and military capabilities over these past 2 weeks. The U.S.-Israel coalition relies primarily on high-intensity, precision joint air and naval strikes. Tactical aircraft sortie rates were extremely high in the early stages of the war. According to Iranian reports, the Israeli Air Force alone conducted over 1,000 strike missions on just the 3rd day of fighting. Some pilots averaged 12 to 13 hours of flight time per day, pushing sortie rates to their absolute limit. This level of saturation strikes achieved major results, including the successful targeted killing of top Iranian military and political figures, such as Supreme Leader Khamenei and Defense Minister Aziz, along with intensive strikes on government and power centers across major Iranian cities. The coalition has also attempted to use propaganda to incite Iran's internal opposition and Kurdish groups to rise up, hoping to destabilize the regime from within. However, as the war dragged on, sustaining such high-intensity bombing proved difficult, and days of internal subversion efforts yielded little result. Both Tehran residents and Kurdish populations showed little real-world response. From March 8th, the coalition shifted strategy, redirecting strikes toward infrastructure such as oil refineries and desalination plants, aiming to increase pressure on civilians and force the Iranian government to make concessions. The coalition has also continued destroying Iran's military, industrial, and port facilities since day one, and has relentlessly hunted mobile targets, especially Iran's mobile ballistic missile launch systems, as part of its long-term strategic campaign. The results against the latter have been relatively modest. Unlike the coalition's broad and precise strikes, Iran's counterattacks are focused but resource-strained, aiming to drag the conflict into a war of attrition, given the IRGC's finite missile stockpile. Iran's effective strike options are limited to drones and surface-to-surface missiles, All other military branches play only a supporting role. Before the war, Iran held an estimated inventory of around 2,000 medium-range missiles, 8,000 short-range missiles, and 20,000 to 30,000 suicide drones, a total projected payload of roughly 5,000 tons of TNT equivalent. However, only 2,000 to 3,000 tons of that could realistically reach Israel. Compared to the coalition's airborne-led strikes, Iran lags behind in both accuracy and overall strike capability. More critically, due to insufficient domestic production of precision guidance components, most of Iran's medium-range ballistic missiles have poor accuracy, with a circular error probable seep up to 200 to 500 meters, causing major targeting deviations when the IRGC strikes key objectives. Especially after March 5th, Iran began mass deploying missiles fitted with cluster warheads covering a dispersion radius of up to 8 kilometers, designed to overwhelm and exhaust Israel's missile defense interceptors rather than achieve precision kills. Even so, against Israel's multi-layered defense network, Iran's missile penetration rate stands at only 20% to 40%. Drone penetration is even harder, with almost no successful cases recorded so far. As a result, Iran's strikes on Israel are primarily a harassment campaign, firing small salvos and multiple rounds to deplete Israel's expensive interceptors and wear down Israeli society's tolerance for the war. Iran's true strategic priority, however, is the Gulf region. U.S. military assets are densely concentrated there. Gulf states have limited anti-missile operational capability, and their territories are too vast for comprehensive defense. At the same time, Iran's short-range missiles and drones are far more accurate than its medium-range arsenal, making the Gulf a far more viable target for precision strikes. By repeatedly striking U.S. bases, early warning systems, and oil infrastructure across the Gulf, and by blockading the Strait of Hormuz, Iran is clearly attempting to apply economic pressure, pushing Gulf states to lobby Washington to end the war. As for where this war is headed, we won't make any bold predictions. The trajectory of the conflict will, for the foreseeable future, remain highly dependent on the military balance between the two sides and their specific political objectives. For the U.S.-Israel coalition, military operations are always tied to political goals. But strategically, there are divisions within the coalition. Israel favors escalating strikes on Iranian infrastructure to worsen civilian conditions and turn the public against the regime. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of Defense Hegseth has raised the possibility of a ground invasion, with the U.S. considering special operations or limited ground incursions to achieve specific objectives, such as destroying certain critical facilities or establishing proxy forces. For Iran, its military campaign has clear phased objectives. Against Israel, Iran is systematically depleting coalition interceptor stockpiles through sustained harassment. Before the war, Israel had approximately 250 to 300 interceptor missiles, with the U.S. contributing an additional 100 to 200. Once these are exhausted, Iran's penetration rates will rise sharply. At that point, even under coalition air suppression, Iran may be able to organize concentrated missile salvos from a small number of launchers with enough destructive effect to guarantee real damage. In fact, since March 10th, the U.S. has already begun drawing down THAAD and Patriot missile stockpiles from South Korea to replenish what's been consumed in this conflict. On the Gulf front, Iran's targeting is gradually shifting away from purely hitting U.S. bases, increasingly focusing on destroying the economic foundations of Gulf states, including oil fields and high-end resort infrastructure. This trend looks likely to continue. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoy our brief, stance-neutral, purely military-focused war report format. If you do, hit like and subscribe to keep us going. Your support means everything.